how you farmed last season is very different to how you're going to farm this season. Things are changing very quickly. So we're also leveraging data and leveraging technology to help smallholder farmers stay on top of those changes so that they're able to adjust with the times, because as we can see, the climate story is changing a lot faster than we expect. So we have to have a way of staying ahead of those changes.
Great, thank you for that. Dave, how about you? What problem are you solving, and what is the solution, and how's it contributing to climate resilience?
Well, thank you very much, Anne. So when you look at the impact of climate change on the aquaculture sector, it's a mix of both a complex problem and a complicated problem, especially to the smallholder farmer, which of course then will require multifaceted approach to the solutions. Basically meaning there's no single silver bullet solution to the entire problem. And the question then to us, Aqua-Rich, is how do we develop an innovation that has a multifaceted approach to the problems that smallholder farmers are facing, and try to bring solution to the doorstep of smallholder farmers. What I mean is climate change has impacted the feeding habits of farmers, and so of fish farmers, or the feeding habits of fish. How do we develop a solution that responds to that change in feeding habit simply by an increase or a decrease in water temperature, which directly affects the quantity of feed that fish should consume on a normal basis? Climate change has also had an impact on the production period of fish. To some cases, fish production period has been prolonged. And how does our solution come in to offer additional resources that the farmer needs to adapt to that prolonged production period? This again also affects the marketing pattern of fish, in which case prolonged production period also leads to reduced quantity of fish that is available in the market. How does Aqua-Rich come in that? So what we provide as a solution in Aqua-Rich is a platform that enables small and medium-sized fish farmers to access top quality feed and build trusted relationship with the feed manufacturers, in which case the top quality feed with the better feed conversion ratio helps farmer reduce the prolonged production period. And this enables farmers to remain more climate resilient because they can then produce fish within a given period of time, which is shorter than the prolonged period of time that maybe climate change has led to. Secondly, we provide flexible payment solutions that enable smallholder farmers to remain productive, tackling the prolonged production period. And through this, we are able to get consistent and reliable supply of fish on the market. Most critically is data-driven production system that we are bringing to the doorstep of the farmers through the use of an IoT water temperature sensor. Now, understanding that water temperature is a key determinant of quantity of feed that fish feeds, we have automated the process by which smallholder farmers get access to data on water temperature, which drives the quantity of feed they are feeding on a daily basis. And through this, by climate change causing either a decrease or an increase in water temperature, farmers are then able to adapt on precision feeding techniques using our technology. And through this, we save considerable amount of feed that will otherwise be wasted and not consumed by fish because the farmer didn't adapt the good climate smart way of feeding the fish. We come in there to provide that data-driven precision feeding, which helps farmers to become climate resilient and in turn saves the feed that will otherwise be wasted, reducing the production cost of the farmer and saving the environment downstream, because fish farming happens in water bodies, either in the lake or in the ponds, and downstream there will always be users. So by providing access to precision feeding techniques, you then reduce pollution of water in the lake or downstream that will make aquaculture contribute negatively towards greenhouse gas emission. So by eliminating that pollution aspect through precision feeding, you build an aquaculture sector in Africa that is green, even though it's happening in blue waters, but it's green in application. But then again, you also build small and medium-sized fish farmers that have developed resilience to climate change. That is how Aquareach tackles it. Thank you.
That's a very compelling case on its contribution to climate resilience. Can you just again explain for me how the technology is so important in achieving sort of better production of fish, the fish feed, etc.? So where does the technology come in? What does it look like?
So the technology has three main approach, because it's basically a platform. And first and foremost is we have incorporated fintech solution, which means smallholder farmers can buy top quality feeds at the comfort of their farm and get this through a last mile delivery system delivered right at their farm. These feeds are normally a preserve of few commercial large-scale farms, but what we have managed to do is that smallholder farmers in rural Africa are now able to access these top quality feeds by the click of a button. Secondly, upon the farmer trading with us on the platform, they qualify for a flexible payment solution, meaning if a farmer requires 100 kilograms of feed to feed the fish this month and is only able to manage 50 kilograms worth of feed, the platform is able to provide the farmer with the additional 50 kilograms of feed required. And so the farmer gets to remain productive throughout the production cycle. This helps in fighting, the farmer being resilient to the climate change. Sorry, I'm in a hot place, so I'm sweating a lot. The third way by which our technology works is by enabling farmers to access water temperature through the use of an IoT water temperature sensor, which relays the water temperature data from the farm to the application. The application then calculates for the farmer how much feed he is supposed to feed at that particular interval. What this does directly is that it gives the farmer precision feeding technique, number one. Number two, it eliminates wastage of feed. So by enabling farmers to access feeds with the better feed conversion ratio, flexible payment solution to the feed, and practice precision feeding, this farmer is able to reduce up to 40% of his production cost and be up to 60% more productive than a farmer who is operating outside this platform, who is forced to use sinking mash feed with low production period, has no access to a flexible payment solution, and doesn't practice precision fish feeding. That is how our solution supports small and medium-sized farmers in Africa, Kenya specifically, to become climate resilient.
Great, thanks, Dave, for really clarifying how the technology works, which is just so important in all three cases to reach the numbers, reduce costs, and enable flow of inputs and services. So really fantastic and compelling stories around the power of technology. I'm going to now turn to an investor. So Milas, I'm looking at you. So what are you looking for? We've heard about these three cases, and you know, one of the questions I have is fantastic business models addressing very particular problems to do with climate change and waste management. And obviously, as an investor myself, I'm thinking, okay, so what's the revenue stream and how do I achieve scale, and what else is needed in order to make these sort of business models attractive to investment. So what are you looking for, and what is kind of the reason why you, as a fund manager, are thinking of raising a fund to invest specifically in the climate resilient space?
Great question. I'll try to be brief because tough to tackle in a brief manner. But I'll start actually with your second question and then go to what we look for in terms of criteria. So, why do we decide to start focusing on this, on climate resilience in particular, and actually at the nexus with financial resilience, because there is a lot of overlap between achieving climate resilience and adaptation goals and also broader development outcomes like increased income and others that are really useful for those communities. So having been investing in Africa for the past 7 years, we've seen we see tremendous opportunity. Africa is the youngest continent globally. It's leapfrogging actually developed markets when it comes to technology trends and advancements in technology, exactly exemplified by what the startup CEOs have been sharing. And advancement in mobile adoption, internet availability, mobile money usage now, and more broadly, solutions like Dave's, IoT, machine learning, AI are actually creating abundant data points that were never available before and are allowing for these innovations to really overcome barriers of scale and reach of more vulnerable low-income communities that are obviously hard to get to usually. And when it comes to climate change, we actually see that as both a threat and an opportunity. It's a threat because it's going to disrupt the way that businesses do business, across all systems and value chains, from food systems to water management, to smallholder farming, waste management. And it will disrupt the way that households live, work, consume, right, at all levels. And yet it's also an opportunity because it allows us the chance to rethink the way that these systems work and operate and make them more inclusive, more resilient over time, accounting for some of these impacts that can be ignored. We're past the level when you speak with climate change experts, we're past the point where we can avoid some of these impacts. So adaptation and resilience is de facto something that everyone has to do. So that for us means that there's going to be increased demand for solutions like these, solutions like Ella's and Dave's and Aisha, both from consumers, but also from businesses, as these systems need to be restructured and changed over time. So as an investor, we think that this is the time to get into this space. In fact, maybe we could have done it even earlier, but we're at this tipping point where it's unavoidable. The time is now. If we don't do it now, things are going to get even worse, and this opportunity is not going to be capitalized. Lastly, I will say to your point about scalability, we do think that these solutions have commercial scale potential, that they can be replicated across markets. And so we look at businesses that can, for example, scale Pan-Africa, or even potentially go to other emerging markets, because the threats actually are quite similar across a number of markets, with their idiosyncrasies, obviously, but across a number of markets. So that's why we decided to do this now. And in addition, the other, elephant in the room is that funding flows to adaptation and resilience have historically been extremely low. So in fact, I think the gap is estimated by UNEP to be roughly $300 billion to adaptation solutions. So the magnitude of the gap is enormous. And when we look at the gap to more broadly the UN goal, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that's $2.5 trillion. So we have to mobilize a lot more. And to do that, you need obviously also validation of what are the models that work and why, and what's the scalability path. So for us, coming so early in the journey with entrepreneurs, it allows us to come in at the beginning, help develop alongside entrepreneurs, solutions that can scale and also, of course, benefit low-income underserved communities. And with that, create success stories and highlight them. And hopefully that will attract a lot more capital to the space. So I think that answered your first question. And in terms of my criteria, very quickly, we look for startups that are early stage, so pre-seed, that have not usually raised large institutional rounds, enabled by technology, and in particular, often with the fintech element to them. So Aisha, for example, has credit for farmers, and Dave also built a buy now, pay later solution for aquaculture farmers. Ala has a mobile wallet that enables transactions to happen digitally. This all drives down costs, but also then creates opportunity for further inclusion, even financially. And we also look at local founding teams. We have a goal as a fund to reach 40% women entrepreneurs, so also women founders, because there's a big gap there as well, as you all know. And a big focus on underserved, vulnerable communities with potential for scale.
Great.
Stop here.
Yeah, no, thanks, Maëlys. And I want to come back to you on this question of why are investors not investing in this space? And I think you've touched a little bit on that. But before I do, I want to get a perspective from Aisha, Dave, and Ala on what has been their challenge to raise capital for their business. First of all, how have they raised their capital? And what has really been their challenge in their engagement with investors? So Ala, Dave, Aisha, anybody want to share?
Yeah, I can. I think it's a tricky one. For me, I met over 20 investors, angel investors, and also VCs. The majority of the feedback, they said we are like the NGOs. So yeah, that means we cannot scale because we are working in the sector which is a climate tech sector. They don't have enough data for this field. This is the first thing. The second part, the scalable business. They believe we have an extreme operations, so they cannot invest in the risky startups. This is the majority of the feedback that I get from the VCs. Yeah.
So key concern about scalability, if I got this right, scalability of the business.
Yes, scalability. Yes.
And then lack of data on the commercial side of the business, or just data generally?
Yeah. Commercial, yes. They don't have a clear vision about the waste field.
Right.
So they need more data. They don't have a clear vision about when they invest in this field, what is the return? Yes.
Yeah. So kind of a lack of information and comparables.
Yes.
In the waste management space, that will allow them to be informed from a commercial perspective and a return perspective. Okay, very interesting. So how are you funding your business at the moment?
In 2019, yes, I invested my money. I invested a lot from my money, and I got invested from my father and friends. And then when we validated the product, we got investment from Flatix Labs, Cairo. And then we got investment from Oman, Wadi OTF in 2020. And then we have Catalyst Fund investment and also another angel investor in the round. But it was a great journey. Simply, I met a lot. I get a lot of feedback from this part, and I started to enhance the business model to meet the criteria. Frankly speaking, I eliminated the operational cost. I did a lot of due diligences in this part to reach to a great stage in the business, to make it scalable, to make it generate a great profit. The second part for why the investors don't invest in the climate tech sector, I think after the COVID-19, there is a movement to invest in the fintech and health tech and also in the e-commerce field. The majority of investment, I think, will be invested in these sectors. So due to the COVID-19, so I think, yeah, climate tech is a great sector. I'm working in this sector since 4 years, and I can see a potential market, a great market, especially in Egypt. Yeah.
Okay, great. So very interesting. Interesting comment about this is too much like an NGO sector, and really lack of understanding of the market. So let alone the impact for climate resilience. Better information. Aisha, Dave, what's your experience?
I definitely resonate with the comments that of the operational structure being akin to an NGO. When you're building for impact and focusing on environmental impact, social impact, you're not just zeroing in on financial return. And traditionally, businesses have been built to maximize shareholder returns. So it's that same expectation can't be met when speaking to climate resilient and social impact driven companies, because they have a broader perspective. And when you're focusing on more than one outcome, i.e. being more than financial, and also looking at the social impact, the environmental impact, growth is slower. Traction isn't as fast as your traditional financial businesses. Looking at the sub-Saharan African ecosystem as an example, fintech has been the most funded business type over the last 2 to 3 years, over the last half decade. What's the impact of those businesses at annual interest rates of 68% to 90%? How are you actually helping the majority of folks on the continent who are low to medium impact? So there is a huge gap in terms of the expectations. I mean, I think there's first of all, there are a couple of things I've identified. Certain investors branding themselves as impact, but not truly being impact. So I think that miscommunication also creates a challenge for impact startups, impact businesses when they're trying to drive conversations. Because if you're an impact investor, but the bottom line expectation you're having does not include gender equality or the impact on climate, what impact are you looking at? Is it just financial? So I think, first of all, that branding creates a challenge. I think in terms of the period of return as well, this is a new industry. There needs to be ecosystem support, and it's still growing. So of course, again, it doesn't have those exponential factors as more traditional businesses like e-commerce or banking, which is, you know, historically quite old as an industry. Things like waste that Ally is doing, or agriculture, is still very informal to an extent. So again, growth wouldn't be as quick. So those are some of the challenges and the themes that I've experienced trying to raise finance. In the early days, founder contribution, as Ala mentioned, you find this across most sustainability and climate startups. I was part of Techstars Accelerator late last year, and most of those companies were, you know, the start was funded by the founders. And that's because you have to prove the concept first. You don't really find that in climate driven or impact driven companies. You can actually raise the money on just an idea. For similar to Ala, build the business on founder contributions, received grants from Lagos State in Nigeria, as well as the UK government through the Royal Academy of Engineering, from Techstars Sustainability, because that was actually a pool of money that was directly focused on sustainability, and some angels. So those have been our balance, I suppose, our capital sources thus far. And yeah, hopefully that gives some clarity on the challenges of trying to get finance.
Great. No, thank you. So a lot of work needs to be done, you know, on the impact side, the impact investor side was what I'm hearing from you in terms of a risk return, or do we really understand the risk return? Because the impact is important in terms of the people you're serving and the outcomes you're trying to achieve. And here the outcomes are climate resilience, which also carries a heavy risk, because we don't address it. You know, we are going to be as humanity in a pretty bad you know, state. And so those calculations of risk to just being able to operate and live because of the impact that climate is having on livelihoods needs to be included in your impact sort of assessment. So interesting angle. Dave, anything to add to this conversation? And then I'm going to go to Milas to ask for her response as an investor. Dave.
Why are your margins not 50, 60%? When all farmers in Africa are going to adapt technology, how fast can the technology spread? Very difficult questions to answer to investors who are looking for money, you know, and we have had those kind of very difficult conversations. And those are some of the challenges when you are a startup and you are venturing into a promising sector like aquaculture, which we know is one of the fastest growing agricultural value chains in Africa, and has a huge, massive potential because people are trying to move into white meat consumption. And aquaculture holds a lot of answers to that part. But is aquaculture able to match some of the margins that are exhibited in other sectors of investment that most typical investors have been used to? No, it's the food sector. The margins might not be as much if you look at the aquaculture sector in Africa vis-a-vis maybe the salmon industry in Norway and all that, where such kind of markups might exist. So about how do investors respond and understand the sector that we are operating in, and getting to understand that it might need a little bit more of patient capital, and it has a huge potential. I mean, the question normally is how much money should we be making? Then how do we get investors to start understanding that yes, you can still get good returns at 25% or so. It doesn't have to be 40, 50%. It's still good returns that still has an impact, that you won't lose your money. You might not get it as much as you'll get in other sector, but you're going to definitely get your money back. So I think getting investors to understand that on a developing food sector, a lot of dynamics in turn affect the margins that you are able to get. Why? Because even the data is missing. You have to kind of invest in each node of the sector, whether it is at the bulking node, whether it is at the production, whether it is at the distribution, whether it is at the technology side. As a startup, you kind of have to build each node as you scale. And sometimes even the question of specialization. Do you want to focus on input supply? Do you want to focus on marketing? Do you want to focus on distribution? Do you want to focus on production? It's a complex question to answer, because who else has focused on any one sector that you can tie into, you know? And hopefully if you focus on production, somebody else has focused on input supply that then you two can work. None. And sometimes you have to build it from the scratch. So some of the challenges you face as a startup in the climate tech space or the agricultural space infused with climate technology is you have to really invest in each node of the value chain. And investors sometimes are looking for, you know, money in, money out scenario. I invest in production X and I get output Y. But there's a lot that needs to be done before that, so that Y result comes out. I think those are some of the challenges we face as you know, startups in the agricultural sector in Africa that are maybe focused on climate resilient approach when we try to pitch to investors, there are very few BFS, and we want to see more BFS coming on board. Mylis will talk about that, but thank you. That's my take.
Thanks, Dave. And I think what you're also alluding to is the need to think about non-traditional type of investors. So I think we're perhaps thinking too much about impact investors and the ones we know, or VCs and ones we know. But there are other players in the market, and you talked about investing along the kind of the value chain of your business, and that might mean engaging in sort of agreements with some of the corporates that could be, you know, part of an offtake or part of a supplier, and have them financing. So I think one needs to be very creative about how do you think through the funding of your business. But talking to creativity, let me ask you, Mylis. I mean, what is, from your perspective, what do you think are the key challenges for investors? Why aren't we seeing more investors in this space? I mean, you're clearly filling a gap and demonstrating a new asset class, but maybe you can comment on that.
Absolutely. Well, first I'll start with saying that I couldn't agree more with everything that Aisha, Ella, and Dave have shared already. And to reiterate, I think there's a couple of issues at play that are currently limiting the appetite, and more so, well, actually of both traditional commercial investors as well as impact investors to do more in this space. One is certainly the lack of data and comparables, and you know what the exit scenario could look like, because we are in a way in a lot of these models like building the plane as we fly it. So we're not, you know, necessarily already have examples of way more mature companies and what the trajectory could be in these fields, right, that you could use as comparables. So that's often quoted as a challenge. Then I'll say also lack of market knowledge, the regulatory context, and that like generates uneasiness and do more and investing more in Africa. And that can be solved, however, as we start, you know, seeing what are the hero companies out there, like, and shining a light on the innovations that can work, sharing that knowledge with a wider group of investors. And then I think also one thing that others haven't mentioned is sometimes, you know, investors don't have the ability and capacity, just by way in which traditional VC models are typically built, to provide more value add to the startups in reaching scales, like in, you know, achieving growth faster, and while maintaining, of course, that impact mandate and serving lower income communities. And there's actually often a poor understanding of that, like what are the needs, the demands, right, the necessities of that population. Like it's not really well known to most investors. So this is why, you know, to me, there's ways in which we can be creative at solving these challenges. One is in the way that we structure new vehicles. So the whole, you know, literature and, you know, now examples of blended finance vehicles that allow one to deploy capital, but at the same time also really provide hands-on deep support to entrepreneurs in building those business models. And that does two things. Like on the one hand, it's additional value at the early stages, so essential, like just filling gaps that teams don't usually have. But also it's an education play. Like it helps the investors getting way smarter around the issues that entrepreneurs face, like being in the trenches with them, doing the work. And that's the fastest way in which you can learn, and then sharing that with other investors. So that's, you know, you structure more like blended finance structures that have both components. It's very important. And then the second, I think, creativity needed is allowing for more ecosystem building initiatives that bring investors together, that generate knowledge that can be shared with a wider range of players across, as Dave was saying, the investment continuum. So from the early stage to later stage, so the later stage investors can see what's happening, you know, the pre-seed, and keep track of the companies as they grow and develop, and that will eventually, you know, fill the gaps along the continuum, which is very much needed. And lastly, to Dave's point again, having a more creative portfolio approach as an investor in this space, I think it's really important. Like if I'm investing in, you know, for example, credit first product for smallholder farmers, how am I thinking also of allowing the off-takers like to purchase the inputs from the farmers, and maybe investing in a platform that does that, or an insurance provider, insurance company that can provide a crop insurance and enable those partnerships between the portfolio. I think it's also very important.
Great, thank you, Milas. There's a couple of comments in the chat, but I do want to open it up to our participants if they have a specific question on what we've covered so far, or to one of our panelists. Please feel free to either post them, or if you want to just raise your hand, and I will definitely invite you to ask your question. But I want to go to, we talked a lot about your individual startup models and what you're trying to do, what problem you've identified, and what's the role of technology. And we discussed really the investing side, the challenges you've faced in raising capital, and then also we've heard from Milas on some of the challenges that investors might see, but some of the potential solutions. I think in this conversation, as we're building an asset class, because this is all is a new sector, and there is a comment here about that, this is this is an emerging sector, if you will, emerging asset class. And so there needs to be involvement of potentially non-traditional stakeholders. We've also had a comment from somebody around hydrogeography and the interest they have with subsistence farmers and finding sort of new hydrology technology solutions. So I wonder if you could just share with us, this question to all four of you to give you a response to. Who are the other players that we need to engage in developing sort of climate resilience models as an asset class? And I know it's quite varied. We're talking about agri-tech, or working with smallholder farmers, waste management, and aquaculture. So I know it's quite varied, but it seems to me that we need many different players involved: the scientists, the engineers that are coming up with interesting solutions on hydrology, et cetera. So maybe you could just share with us your perspective of other stakeholders that are important in building this emerging class of investable opportunities. Milas, do you want to go ahead? Or did you have your...
Oh, sorry, there was a lag. So what are other, to your question, what are other investors, who are other investors that are building or enabling the continuum, right? Was that the... Oh, I can't hear you anymore.
Oh, sorry. Can you hear me?
Okay, go ahead. Yes.
It's who are the other stakeholders that are required in the ecosystem? So not necessarily the investors. There are other partnerships potentially that could help develop this asset class. So if I'm looking at aquaculture, I'm sure that there is some participation of scientists, in defining, the solutions around proper nutritional, value of fish feed, or just water quality, or things like that. I mean, I'm not a specialist in this, but I'm just that there must be other stakeholders that we need to bring into this conversation.
Definitely.
That could provide the required information or solutions to begin to grow out this as a viable sort of business sector.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, the quick answer is that I think many, actually all probably stakeholder ties need to come to the table to really tackle this issue. And by that, I mean, we need certainly the experts, like from academia or other, research organizations that really like technical expertise to help inform the models, right? The innovators, because sometimes the people that, are very savvy from a business model perspective may not have that, deep technical expertise in a certain topic. And so actually the two coming together is very important. We need the business world, like the corporates that are key players, both from a partnership perspective, but also from sometimes an investment perspective. And we've seen actually this across the continent in other sectors where corporates have taken a key role setting up, for example, their own venture, CVCs, like corporate venture initiatives, or partnering extensively with younger startups that they can then potentially acquire. So when it comes to climate resilience space, we could see this with larger waste management plants, or agriculture corporations that may benefit from the technology enablement provided by the innovators. And you also, I think, actually need, when it comes to adaptation and resilience, the local, sometimes nonprofit communities to the table, because as somebody pointed out actually in the chat, a lot of the disconnect comes from, again, understanding like the real needs on the ground, and in building the solutions, designing them with the voice of the beneficiary. And I think connecting to also that sector and really rooting the design of the solutions in the communities is very important. And then finally, of course, the policymakers and regulators always have a key role to play for both enabling the growth of these technologies, and also ensuring the protection of the end user. So that, as we've seen in the fintech sector, which is one that we've historically invested heavily on, you can't ignore it. It's better to have a plan from the beginning, and for innovators and regulators to come at the same table from the start. So I'd say everyone has a role to play and needs to roll up their sleeves.
Great. And any other contributions from our other panelists on this topic? Who else needs to be involved, and what other investors potentially need to be involved in this space?
On my side, I would say in the aquaculture sector, just to echo what Melissa said, you need everyone on board, especially the input manufacturers. There is now a need to ask ourselves, what are we just going to rely on soybean as the only source of protein for fish meal? Can we look at things like insect-based protein sources and others that could be climate friendly or more resilient? And so there's need to put funds into sources of fish feed and look at alternative and what the future will hold. Also, I think the financial sector, the mainstream financial sector, has to adjust and come to the standard to which producers are operating from, especially the farmers. They need to lower the bar a little bit low. It's too high for them. You need to lower the bar a little bit low to start providing services to this cadre of people in the aquaculture space, so that access to inputs can be financed directly through the conventional financial institutions. Access to capital to start up aquaculture farms can also be made easy for farmers at certain levels. So I think those are of course, not to mention large tech companies like Google and the rest need to narrow down, at least try to focus on developing or running accelerators that could work with startups like Aquareach, who are keen to develop solutions that can be easily accessible and affordable to small and medium-sized fish farmers in sub-Saharan Africa. That would be my take. Okay.
Interesting. Ala, Aisha, anything else to add?
I think given the risk, sorry, Ala, I think given the risk, it's important to get get support from like DFIs and institutions that are able to bear the additional risk that comes with building climate resilient, impacts focused businesses. I think it's important to note that the ecosystem is still growing. And you made a comment earlier, Anne-Marie, that about the future, the risk of a less suitable future being increased, the less companies that we have addressing our climate issues. And I think that the more capital goes away from climate impacts and to other businesses that are increasing inequality, the more you are worsening the problem that you're trying to solve. I participated on a talk by Skoll discussing the future of impact finance over the weekend, and there are a couple of very interesting takeaways. So some challenges in terms of deployment of finance from fund managers is, for instance, in the UK, the CDC, which has now been renamed the British, the BII, they have a minimum 20 million investment ticket to fund managers. So if they're given 20 million as their minimum ticket, there are very few funds that can absorb that in sub-Saharan Africa. So by default, you've already created a segmentation. Because if you're only giving those funds to certain types of fund managers who don't necessarily have impact as their focus, you're giving it to existing businesses that already have not necessarily a monopoly, but monopolistic advantages versus climate impact, which then means that the climate impact companies are even competing less. So it's like not just the fact that the climate impact companies are not receiving funding, but the fact that the funding is going elsewhere is also creating a less competitive space for those companies to operate. So I think we have to have a broader perspective of frameworks of the larger institutions that are developing, that deploying capital and getting involved folks that are actually de-risking the sector for such businesses. Yeah, that would be my contribution.
Thank you, Aisha. I think those are very, very pertinent sort of issues that you've identified, and I think it really does go to the heart of the need for different types of funding vehicles, and I think moving away from traditional fund management structures to alternative types of structures, and FSD, Africa Investments, is actually trying to pioneer that, to really test out different types of models that are more suitable to channel capital to the SME sector in Africa, which includes the startup environment, because that's where the growth is going to come from. So yes, completely spot on. But then how do you achieve scale? Because you do need to achieve scale, and fortunately our markets are fragmented, which is another challenge that I'm sure you're faced in trying to achieve scale. I mean, Aisha, you said your business is in Nigeria, and was it Dave? It was in two countries, Kenya.
So Nigeria and Kenya.
And another country, yeah. So really trying to look at those economies of scale that make it attractive for investment. We have 10 minutes left. So Ala, if you wanted to respond to this, and then I'd like to ask you a question. Two more questions really on COP27 that's coming up. So Ala.
Yeah, sure.
Shall I go ahead with my question, or did you want to comment on this particular topic?
No, we can move to the COP27. Okay,
great. So COP27 is coming up, and it's going to be in your country, Ala. So, and there's going to be many different stakeholders there, from the DFIs, governments, policymakers, regulators, banks, financial institutions. So what are your aspirations? What would you like to deliver as a message to that community based on kind of the opportunities you see in the market and the problems that you're solving, and really as a community that's representing a new asset class that is addressing very specifically and very concretely climate resilience. So just give me, each one of you, a message, and it could be the same one, but I'd really love to hear your messages that you'd like to deliver at COP27. And we'll try to make sure.
I think, yeah, it's a great opportunity to see the COP27 in Egypt. It's a great opportunity for Africa and the MENA region for sure. But I think if I need to deliver a message for the people in the COP27 is the decisions that will be in the COP27. We need this decision to be applied regarding the investment, regarding the rules. We need to take a right decision in this conference. I read a lot about the COP26, COP25, and I saw a lot of recommendations. And after that, I cannot see the result of the recommendations in the ground. So we need to see a solution for the problems over the world, especially in Africa. Africa facing a critical problem, especially in the climate part. Yeah, this is what I expect from the COP27.
Thank you, and I hope being there in Egypt that you'll be able to deliver that. Who else wants to go next? Real quick, what are your aspirations and hopes for COP27?
I think mine would be easy, clear and actionable plans. I think certainly from COP26, lots of the targets were unclear, and we had a lot of things about greenwashing and how commitments were made, and very quickly within the week, those commitments, it was very unclear that those couldn't be met. So I think making the climate targets smart. So are they achievable? Are they attainable? Time bound? Are they relevant? And not just making comments are they measurable and just not making comments for the sake of it. So I think starting with achievable plans that can realistically be met, even from an individual perspective, what can you do to make a better climate? I commit to not using plastic bags. I commit to using tote bags. If you're an investor, I commit to speaking to my investment committee to review how they look at businesses. If you're a DFI, I commit to reviewing, okay, if our target is that we can only deploy capital at $20 million check sizes, what frameworks can we put in place to ensure that where we deploy that capital meets impact? So I think having that measurable and realistic lens is the key takeaway, so we don't have the same backlash as COP26.
Fantastic. That's really very articulate. Milas or Dave?
Yeah, I'll pay. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Yeah, I'll say that by the very fact that COP27 is happening in Egypt, in Africa, and Africa will tend to bear the greatest burden, even though it is one of the least pollutants to the environment, is enough reason for the parties that will be attending the COP27 in Egypt to actualize even 30% of what the resolutions that are going to be made in COP27, because any little effort or impact that any little effort that is taken towards making sure the impact of climate change is reduced has a significant impact on Africa and in the world globally. So we should strive, that's what the message I will give out, that we should strive to achieve even 30% of the resolutions that are going to be made. And hopefully there are resolutions that are geared towards mitigating impact of climate in the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Milas.
Well, piggybacking on what everyone else has said, I think my message or my hopes rather, for COP27 is that, as Sasha said, we do less talking and more action, like coming out of it with like concrete, actionable plans that governments especially don't walk back on a few months later or realize are unfeasible. But at the same time, maintaining high ambition, because as I said earlier, there's no time to waste on this anymore. Like this what's at stake is the future of our planet, the future of our children, everyone's future. And that I think has to really sink into the psychology of everybody sitting at that table. Even if as humans, of course, it's hard to see the future beyond 3 to 5 year span. But there's really no time left. And that needs to be critical. In addition, I'd love to see the topics of climate justice and climate finance and how we actually enable these innovations to take root and reach those most in need to be at the top of the agenda, because that's been lagging in the past, and it's absolutely critical in my view. So here you go, 2 hopes.
Great. Well, thank you very much. We're just 1 minute to the top of the hour. I just want to thank all of the participants. I hope you enjoyed this session. Also just want to acknowledge the sponsors of this session, which is FSD Africa and the Catalyst Fund. And also to let you know that FSD Africa has provided backing to the Catalyst Fund for its Fund 3 in climate resilience, and FSD AI is currently in the process of looking at anchoring the fund. We're in due diligence at the moment. So really do hope that when we have this conversation again in a year's time, we would have advanced a lot further. We'd see a lot more happening in terms of the innovations in this space and a lot more interest by investors and other stakeholders. So keep up the great work, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the sessions and look forward to engaging you again. So thank you again to our panelists for a great session.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.